It was an ordinary afternoon in downtown Boston. Commuters hurried past, tourists photographed Boston Common, and the distant sound of an accordion echoed across the square. André Rieu walked discreetly, almost anonymously among the crowd, until a man in worn clothing with uncertain steps and tired eyes approached. With a soft voice almost apologetic for his existence, he mumbled, "Sir, could you give me 2 hours?" The reaction around was immediate. Contained laughter, ironic comments. Looks full of contempt. He's asking for money, from André Rieu of all people. These homeless people are all the same. The man lowered his head, ready to hear another rejection. But André didn't laugh. He didn't recoil. He only asked calmly, "Why exactly $2?" Silence took over the square, and the answer that would come, and what André would do next, would completely change that moment and bring the homeless man to tears before everyone's eyes. Hours before that moment on Boston Common, André Rieu had decided to do something that always connected him with his adopted city: walk alone through the streets of Boston. It was early afternoon, the sky was cloudy, a light wind blew from the Charles River, and the sound of church bells from Trinity Church echoed softly. André loved such days. No stages, no orchestras, just the simplicity of the city where he often performed, with its coffee shops serving fresh pastries, its hurried commuters, and the mix of accents from tourists who came to discover Boston's historic charm. That day, he walked with his hands in his pockets, observing details that most ignored: the aroma of bread from a hidden bakery, the reflection of the Charles River Bridge in the calm water, the line of students buying donuts at Faneuil Hall Marketplace. Despite his worldwide fame, André always felt part of ordinary life there. He loved being anonymous, hearing loose conversations, feeling like just another resident. As he crossed the street toward Boston Common, he noticed something he had seen increasingly in recent years: the increase of people living on the streets, men and women sitting at store entrances, trying to protect themselves from the cold that lingered even outside winter. One of them caught his attention earlier, a thin man with a torn jacket carrying an old bag. He sat on a bench staring at the ground, motionless, as if trying to disappear in the middle of the square. André didn't know he would see him again a few hours later, and he had no idea that encounter, seemingly simple, would be witnessed by dozens of people, some ready to judge, others ready to laugh. What André would do at that moment would completely transform what the square would witness that day. The bustle on Boston Common had its usual rhythm. Tourists photographed the facade of Trinity Church, residents rode past on bikes, students talked loudly while sharing portions of fries. André Rieu walked without haste, observing everything with the calm of someone who knows every corner, every sound, every aroma of that city. But something else that day caught his attention. The same man he had seen earlier, now sitting by a stone column, holding the old bag as if it were his only possession. His name was Jordan, though no one there knew that. For most, he was just another homeless man, another forgotten face among so many. His worn jacket, unkempt hair, and tired eyes made him invisible to almost everyone. He looked at the feet quickly passing by, avoiding him, as if he were an annoying obstacle on the sidewalk. Occasionally he mumbled something to himself, perhaps courage, perhaps regret. When André approached, Jordan raised his head for the first time in hours. He recognized the face immediately, not because he was a classical music fan, but because it was impossible to live in America without seeing André Rieu in newspapers, on billboards, or on New Year's broadcasts. For a few seconds he hesitated. A knot tightened his stomach. What if they ridiculed him? What if André ignored him like so many others? But hunger was stronger than fear. Jordan slowly stood up, almost stumbling, and took a few uncertain steps until he stood before the maestro. The crowd immediately noticed the movement. Eyes turned, cell phones began to rise. Some curious people whispered. André noticed the man's nervous look and stopped, attentive, giving him space. "Sir, could you give me $2?" asked Jordan with a voice that was almost inaudible. The request hung in the air as if it were something absurd. To the right, a group of young people laughed discreetly. "2? From him of all people?" said one of them, Ryan, without hiding the sarcasm. Nearby, a vendor named Tyler shook his head, mumbling, "Always the same, always asking, never working." André heard everything but didn't react immediately. He only observed Jordan, The way his hands trembled, the way he avoided eye contact, how he seemed ready to shrink at the slightest sign of rejection. It was the face of shame, of humiliation so often repeated that it had already become part of the routine. Most expected André to smile politely and walk away. Others expected a sermon. Some expected a quick gesture of charity, just to end the scene. But none of that happened. André tilted his head slightly and asked, with the calm voice that silenced the whispers around, "Why exactly $2? The silence was almost immediate. The question surprised even Jordan, who blinked several times trying to understand. Ryan laughed again. "Why $2? Because he wants beer, obviously." Tyler mumbled something about freeloaders, and a student named Madison, who was walking by, stopped only to observe. She didn't expect this scene to develop so intensely. Jordan swallowed hard. The question wasn't offensive, but it touched something deep inside him. He breathed deeply, trying to keep his voice stable, but it came out trembling. I just wanted to eat a sandwich. Nothing more. Just that." The simple honesty, almost childlike, broke part of the coldness around. A lady named Emily, who had only been watching from a distance, frowned, uncomfortable with her own indifference. André kept his eyes on him. There was no judgment. There was no haste. There was only genuine attention that Jordan hadn't received in years. But before André could respond, a new disruption came. An older man, dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase, stopped abruptly beside them. It was clear he was in a hurry, but the scene had caught his attention. "Is this some kind of street theater?" the man asked, irritated, looking at André. "Or is this man really trying to bother celebrities?" Jordan cringed, his body stiffened as if he had been hit. Madison, the student, felt a wave of frustration. She stepped forward. "He's only asking for help," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "Help?" The man in the suit laughed coldly. "These people always ask for help. That's their specialty." André slowly turned toward the man. His face remained calm, but there was something in his eyes. Something that made the man stop talking. "Do you know him?" André asked quietly. "No, of course not." "Then I would suggest you don't judge him." The man opened his mouth to respond, but André had already turned back to Jordan, who was now trembling with shame and anger. "I'm sorry," whispered Jordan. "I shouldn't have asked." "Why not?" asked André. Jordan looked up in surprise. "Why shouldn't you ask for help?" The question lingered. No one had an answer. And while the crowd waited for what would happen next, some curious, others ashamed, one thing became clear. André Rieu wasn't going to walk away. And what he would say and do would change the entire square. Boston Common remained silent after Jordan's simple answer. The cold wind rose between the coffee shop tables, fluttered napkins, and spread the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. But no one there moved. Everyone waited for André's reaction. They expected something quick, automatic, predictable. But André was not a man of automatic answers. He took a step forward, approaching without any sign of fear, and asked calmly, "How long have you been living like this, Jordan?" The surprise took hold of the crowd. He hadn't asked why. What for? What have you done with your life? He asked how long, as if he wanted to understand the journey, not the fault. Jordan looked around, uncertain, as if seeking permission to answer. The presence of the curious, the cell phones pointed at him, the whispers. Everything made him want to retreat, but André's gaze was firm, patient, sincere, and that forced him to continue. 2.5 years, maybe 3, mumbled Jordan, rubbing his frozen fingers. "I lost my job at a factory in Detroit. After that, everything fell apart." He hesitated. "My family doesn't talk to me anymore." A murmur of discomfort went through the audience. Even the most skeptical felt the sentence like a weight on their chest. But not everyone. Ryan whispered to a friend, "They can tell those stories well." The sentence cut through the air like a knife. Jordan heard it. He immediately lowered his head, as if pushed to the ground. André directed his gaze to Ryan. He said no word, but the silence was enough to make the young man look away, uncomfortable. Student Madison pressed the phone in her hands. She didn't know why, but this scene touched her. It wasn't the fact that it was André Rieu. It was the way he addressed someone the world preferred to ignore. "And today," continued André softly, "why did you decide to ask for help?" Jordan breathed deeply. a heavy breath, almost painful. Because I couldn't take the hunger anymore. His voice failed. And 2 is enough not to sleep with pain in my stomach. Tyler, the vendor, crossed his arms, irritated. You shouldn't be begging here. You're scaring customers away. A look of disapproval came from Emily, the lady who was watching from a distance. She recognized herself in the thoughts she had had minutes earlier. Something in her was changing without her noticing. André took a few steps, positioning himself between Jordan and the man who criticized him. Not aggressively, but protectively, like someone defending someone who had already received too much from life. With a soft but firm voice, André asked, Do you know him? Do you know anything about his life? Tyler opened his mouth to answer, but had nothing to say. André turned back to Jordan. That man, so accustomed to indifference, now had all the maestro's attention, and that made him emotionally vulnerable. But before the conversation could continue, a new disruption came. A middle-aged woman, dressed in a neat coat, stopped beside the group. She looked at Jordan with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Is this real? She asked loudly. Or is this some kind of publicity stunt? The question fell like a bomb. Jordan's face turned red with shame. Madison turned angrily. This isn't a stunt, she shouted. This is a human being asking for help. The woman stepped back, surprised by the reaction. André raised his hand, calming. It's not a stunt, he said quietly. It's the reality that many prefer to ignore. The woman swallowed, suddenly feeling small. André addressed Jordan again. Do you think about giving up? Asked André, without beating around the bush. Jordan pressed the bag against his chest. For a few seconds the silence was so deep that even the sound of bicycles in the background seemed distant. I think about it. That was all he could say. The honesty shocked part of the crowd. Madison put down her cell phone, moved. Emily put her hand on her chest, felt a tightness. Ryan finally stopped laughing. But just as André was about to respond, another disruption came. A young man dressed in sportswear rode past on his bike and shouted, Hey, homeless guy, why don't you get a job instead of begging? The words were hard, cruel. Jordan cringed as if he had been physically hit. The crowd murmured indignantly. Even Tyler, who had been critical earlier, looked angrily at the cyclist. André turned around, his voice still calm but with a new weight. And you, have you ever lost everything? The young man stopped, surprised. What? Have you ever lost your job, your family, your home? Have you ever asked for help and only received contempt? The young man opened his mouth, but nothing came out. André continued. It's easy to judge when you've never walked in his shoes. The young man rode away, without saying another word. The crowd was now completely silent. André looked around, his eyes meeting everyone's. You see a homeless man, he said, but I see a human being fighting to survive. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. And while the crowd expected what André would do now, one thing was clear. This was no longer a simple encounter. This was something that would touch everyone's life. The silence hanging over Boston Common seemed too heavy for an ordinary afternoon in Boston. The cold wind blew through the empty coffee shop tables, lifting napkins and touching the faces of those watching, as if even the weather was paying attention to what was about to happen. Jordan remained motionless, his bag held so tightly that his fingers turned white. He was used to being ignored, pushed away, sent away. He was used to the invisible blow of indifference, but he wasn't used to the gaze of someone who wanted to hear him. That gaze, André's, made him vulnerable. André took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The crowd instinctively leaned forward as if everyone was drawn by a silent force. Let me ask you something, Jordan, said André, with a calm voice. When was the last time you heard someone say you have value? Jordan blinked. The question hit him like a physical impact. He opened his mouth, but couldn't answer. His face contorted in an expression that mixed shame and pain. The crowd waited, some with guilt, others with curiosity. Ryan, who had mocked earlier, now stared intently, not daring to speak. After long seconds, Jordan mumbled, I can't remember. The answer made Emily discreetly wipe away a tear that kept appearing in the corner of her eye. Madison, the student, stepped forward as if she wanted to see better, or feel better. André crouched down. He positioned himself at Jordan's height, which made several people hold their breath. A world-famous maestro, millionaire, beloved everywhere, sat on the sidewalk, looking into the eyes of a man the whole world ignored. "Look at me, Jordan." Jordan hesitated but obeyed. "You asked for $2 because you're hungry," said André slowly. "But what you really lost wasn't the money, it was the dignity they took from you." Jordan's chest began to rise and fall faster. Something inside him was breaking, or freeing itself. André continued, "How many people walked past you today? How many looked at you as if you were part of the ground? How many laughed?" Jordan's eyes filled with tears. But he didn't cry. Not yet. The crowd remained motionless. André's words weren't a prepared speech. It was raw sincerity, born right there in the heart of the square. "You didn't ask for fortunes," said André. "You didn't ask for miracles. You asked for just $2. That's all." Then the maestro did something unexpected. He extended his hand to Jordan, not with money but with a simple and human gesture. "Before anything else, you deserve respect," said André firmly. "Every human being deserves that, even when the world forgets." Jordan pressed his lips together, fighting against crying. He wasn't used to real kindness. It was as if he was receiving light after years of living in darkness. And then, for the first time since the beginning of this scene, his voice came without trembling. "Why? Why are you doing this?" André answered with a small smile. "Because no one should fall so deep that they stop being treated as human." The murmuring began, not of mockery, but of admiration. Madison put down her cell phone. She realized this wasn't something to film, it was something to feel. Tyler, the vendor, immersed in guilt, looked away. Ryan, who had laughed earlier, now seemed ashamed of his own words. And Jordan finally let a tear roll. André saw it and added, "Today, Jordan, you're not alone." But just at that moment, a new disruption came. A group of tourists, not knowing what was happening, began taking photos of the square, and accidentally some pointed their cameras at Jordan. He cringed, feeling exposed, vulnerable. "Please," he whispered, "no photos." André immediately stood up and walked to the tourists. "Excuse me," he said politely but firmly. "This man deserves privacy." The tourists looked surprised, then realized who André was, and shamefully put away their cameras. "We're sorry," mumbled one of them. André nodded and returned to Jordan, but before he could speak again, another man approached, older, with a walking cane, clearly a Boston resident. "Mr. Rieu," said the old man with a trembling voice, "I know this young man. He worked in my neighborhood. He was a good worker. He lost everything when the factory closed." The crowd turned, surprised. Jordan looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Baker," he whispered. The old man nodded. "Yes, Jordan, I remember you. You were always on time, always honest." The revelation fell like a bomb. Suddenly, Jordan was no longer just a homeless man. He was someone with a past, with value, with a history. Tyler felt smaller than ever. Ryan looked at the ground, unable to look anyone in the eye. Mr. Baker continued, "I heard you were living on the streets. I'm ashamed I did nothing to help you." Jordan shook his head, tears flowing. "You had no obligation?" "Yes, I did," interrupted Mr. Baker. "We all have an obligation to take care of each other." André smiled, moved by the old man's words. He addressed the crowd. "Do you see?" he said. "This isn't a stranger. This is someone's neighbor, someone's colleague, someone's friend. He's one of us." The crowd absorbed the words. And while André prepared what he would do next, one thing was clear. This was no longer just Jordan's story. This was the story of everyone who was ever forgotten, ignored, treated as worthless. And what André would do now would change that forever. Boston Common was transformed. What began as an ordinary afternoon with passers-by hurriedly continuing their way was now a gathering of people who stood still, listened and felt. Mr. Baker's words had awakened something in the crowd, a realization that Jordan wasn't just a face in the crowd, but someone with a story, with dignity, with a life that once had meaning. André looked around at all the faces. Some had tears in their eyes. Others looked shamefully at the ground. A few people had put away their cell phones, realizing that what they were witnessing was too sacred to film. "Thank you, Mr. Baker," said André softly. "Your words have more meaning than you realize." The old man nodded, his eyes moist. He walked over to Jordan and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Jordan, I'm sorry. I should have acted sooner. Jordan shook his head vigorously, unable to find words. The emotion was too overwhelming. After years of invisibility, after years of shame and humiliation, he was finally being seen, not as a problem, but as a human being. André addressed the crowd, his voice calm but powerful enough to capture everyone's attention. "What you've seen today," he began, "isn't unique. This happens every day in every square, in every city. People like Jordan are treated as obstacles, as burdens, as something to ignore." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But what if it was your father, your brother, your friend?" Emily, who had been standing still since the beginning, felt a stab in her heart. She thought of her own brother, who had struggled with addiction years ago and almost lost everything. She had helped him then, but how many others had she ignored since? Madison, the student, felt tears burning her eyes. She thought of all the times she had walked past homeless people without even looking. She had always thought she couldn't help or that others could solve it better. But now she realized that indifference was just as harmful as open cruelty. Tyler, the vendor, stood leaning against his shop wall, his arms loose at his sides. He felt small, ashamed. He had pushed away so many people like Jordan from his door, convinced they would scare customers away. But now he realized his coldness might have removed someone's last straw. Ryan, the young man who had first laughed, looked at his shoes. He wanted to disappear, hide from the looks he felt. He had always considered himself a good person, but his words earlier, his mockery, his lack of empathy, showed him a side of himself he didn't want to acknowledge. André continued. "Jordan asked for $2 today, just $2. Not to become rich, not to solve his problems, just to survive that day." He turned to Jordan, who now stood with Mr. Baker's hand still on his shoulder. But what he really asked for, what he really needed, was to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be treated as someone who matters. The silence in the square was complete. Even the sound of the city, the bicycles, the cars in the distance, the chatter of other people, seemed to disappear. André reached into his inner pocket and took out his wallet. The crowd leaned forward, curious about what he would do. But instead of taking out money, André held his wallet and looked at Jordan again. "Before I give you something, Jordan, I want you to understand something." Jordan looked up, his eyes red with emotion. "What I give you today isn't just money. It's a promise. A promise that you are worthy. A promise that you haven't been forgotten. A promise that there are people who care about you." Jordan's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. André took out a stack of bills from his wallet, much more than $2. He folded them carefully and held them in his hand. "This," he said, "isn't to save you. No one can save someone else. But this is to give you a chance to start over, a chance to remember that you're worth it." He carefully placed the bills in Jordan's hand, his fingers closing over those of the homeless man. "And I want you to do something for me," André added. Jordan looked surprised. "What?" "When you're back on your feet, and you will be, help someone else. Pass on what you received today, not the money, but the dignity, the recognition, the hope." Jordan couldn't hold it anymore. The tears flowed freely. His body shook with emotion. He almost fell to his knees, but André held him firmly. "It's okay," whispered André. "You're safe. You're not alone." The crowd around them also began to move. Emily stepped forward, her hand reaching into her bag. She took out some money and offered it to Jordan. "Please," she said softly. "I want to help too." Madison followed, tears on her cheeks. "Me too." Mr. Baker nodded. "And me. Jordan, come to my shop tomorrow. We'll find work for you." One by one, people began to step forward. Not everyone gave money. Some gave their names and contact information. Others offered help with shelter or meals. But everyone gave something. Respect, recognition, humanity. Tyler, the vendor, walked hesitantly forward. His face was red with shame. "Jordan," he began, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. If you want, you can work at my shop. I'll pay fairly." Jordan looked up, amazed. "Really?" Tyler nodded. "Really. Everyone deserves a second chance." Even Ryan, the young man who had mocked, came closer. He couldn't look Jordan in the eye, but he mumbled, "I'm sorry. What I said was wrong. I understand now. André smiled, his heart full. This was what he had hoped to see, not just generosity but transformation. Real change in how people saw each other. "Jordan," said André, his hand still on the man's shoulder, "today you gave us more than you realize. You reminded us of what's really important." Jordan shook his head. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," André replied. "You showed us our humanity. You gave us the chance to be better." The sun began to break through the clouds, a ray of light falling on Boston Common. It was as if even nature was responding to what had happened. André addressed the crowd one last time. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember how you feel now. And the next time you encounter someone like Jordan, ask yourself, what do I choose? Indifference or empathy?" People nodded, some wiping away tears, others holding their hands over their hearts. And while the crowd slowly began to disperse, not in haste, but in reflection, André stayed with Jordan. "What will you do now?" asked André. Jordan looked at the money in his hand, at the contact information people had given him, at the faces that now looked at him with respect. "I'll start by eating," he said with a weak smile. "And then I'll try to live, really live." André nodded, satisfied. That's all I wanted to hear. He gave Jordan a final hug, a real, warm embrace, and whispered, "You're worth it, Jordan. Never forget that." And then as André left the square, he looked back once. Jordan stood there, surrounded by people helping him, his face no longer filled with shame, but with something much more powerful: hope. The days after that afternoon on Boston Common changed Boston in subtle but deep ways. The story of André Rieu and Jordan spread quickly, not through newspapers or television, but through the people who had seen it, who had felt it. Madison, the student, told her friends at the university. Emily, the lady, shared it during a family dinner. Even Tyler, the vendor, told his customers, his voice soft and humble. But the biggest transformation happened in Jordan himself. The first night after the encounter, he slept in a small inn that Mr. Baker had booked for him. It was the first time in almost 3 years that he had a real bed, clean sheets, a warm shower. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to believe this was real. It felt like a dream, a fragile, breakable dream that could disappear at any moment. But it didn't disappear. The next morning he went to Mr. Baker's shop, a small grocery store near Quincy Market. The old man welcomed him with a smile and a cup of warm coffee. "Good morning, Jordan," said Mr. Baker. "Ready to start?" Jordan nodded, still overwhelmed by the kindness. "What should I do?" "Just help with inventory, with customers, with everything that's needed. Nothing complicated. You work, you earn, and you rebuild your life." The work was simple, but Jordan gave himself completely to it. He arrived on time every day, worked hard, and treated every customer with the respect he had so long missed. Slowly, people began to recognize him, not as the homeless man from Boston Common, but as Jordan, that friendly man at Mr. Baker's. A week later, Tyler, the vendor, also came to him with an offer. He had a small storage room that needed organizing, and he wanted to give Jordan a few hours of extra work per week. "If you want," said Tyler hesitantly. "I understand if you don't want to work for someone who treated you so poorly." But Jordan shook his head. "Everyone deserves a second chance. That's what Mr. Rieu taught me." Tyler felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you." Meanwhile, André Rieu's life continued as always. Concerts, rehearsals, travel. But that afternoon on Boston Common stayed with him. It reminded him why he made music, why he stood on stage. Not for fame, not for money, but to touch people, to make them feel something bigger than themselves. One evening, during a concert on Boston Common, André decided to do something he normally didn't do. Before he picked up his violin, he walked to the center of the stage and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but emotional. "A few weeks ago, something special happened here. Not on this stage, but on this square." The crowd listened attentively. "I met a man named Jordan. He asked me for $2. And that moment taught me more than 1,000 concerts ever had." He paused, his eyes glistening. "It taught me that music is beautiful, but humanity is even more beautiful. It taught me that we all have the power to change someone's life, not with grand gestures, but with simple kindness." The crowd applauded, some with tears in their eyes. "And tonight," André continued, "I want to dedicate this concert to Jordan, and to everyone who struggles, who fights, who hopes. You are not forgotten. You are worth it." He picked up his violin and began to play, a beautiful, emotional melody that floated over the square and touched the hearts of thousands. In the crowd stood Jordan, invited by André himself. He wore clean clothes, his hair was cut, his face looked healthier. Next to him stood Mr. Baker, Madison, Emily, Tyler, and even Ryan. All had come to celebrate, not just the music, but the transformation they had all undergone. When the concert ended, André came down from the stage and walked directly to Jordan. The crowd made room, curious but respectful. "How are you doing?" asked André, extending his hand. Jordan took it, his grip firm and grateful. "Better than I ever dared to dream." André smiled. "That's just the beginning." "Thanks to you." "No," corrected André. "Thanks to you. You gave us the chance to be better." Jordan shook his head, his eyes moist. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," replied André. "Just live, and when you get the chance, help another. That's enough." When André turned to leave, Jordan called after him, "Mr. Rieu." André stopped and looked back. "You asked me to pass on what I received. I've already helped someone, a young woman at the train station. She was hungry. I gave her food and told her she wasn't alone." André's smile widened. "That's exactly what I hoped to hear." Months passed. Jordan continued working, saved money, and eventually found a small apartment. He rebuilt his relationship with his sister, who had searched for him after hearing his story. He began volunteering at a local homeless shelter, using his own experiences to help others. Madison, the student, started an organization at her university to create awareness about homelessness. She organized events, collected donations, and brought students together with people who needed help. Emily began working at a soup kitchen every week, preparing and distributing meals to those who were hungry. Tyler transformed his shop into a place where people in need could come for help, not just money, but also advice, contacts, and a friendly conversation. Even Ryan changed. He began writing stories about people he met on the street, sharing their stories to create awareness and cultivate empathy. And André. He continued doing what he always did, making music, touching people, spreading joy. But now, every time he stood on stage, he carried a memory with him, the memory of that afternoon on Boston Common, when a simple request for $2 led to something much bigger. On a cold winter evening, almost a year later, André walked again through Boston Common. The snow fell softly, the lights of the Christmas market glowed warmly. He stopped at the place where he had first met Jordan, his thoughts drifting to that moment. "Mr. Rieu." He turned and saw a young man, not Jordan, but someone else, thin, cold, clearly in need. "Yes," replied André. I'm sorry to ask, but do you have any money? I haven't eaten in days." André smiled, not because it was funny, but because he knew exactly what to do. "Of course," he said. "But first, what's your name?" The young man looked surprised. "Why do you want to know that?" "Because," replied André, "you deserve to be called by name. You're not just someone asking for help. You're a human being." The young man's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Lucas." "Good, Lucas. Let's talk." And while the snow continued to fall over Boston, a new story began, a story of kindness, dignity, and hope. Because that was the true lesson of that day on Boston Common. One moment of humanity can change 1,000 lives. One gesture of respect can inspire generations. And one question, why exactly two, can remind the world of what's truly important. Jordan, now standing on his own feet, looked out the window of his small apartment at the square below. He thought of André, of Mr. Baker, of everyone who had helped him, and he promised himself he would never forget, and he would never stop passing it on, because that was what André had taught him, not just to receive, but to give, not just to be saved, but to save others, not just to be seen, but to see others. And on that cold winter evening in the warmth of his modest home, Jordan felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. But the story of that transformative day on Boston Common was far from over. It had created ripples that would continue to spread through the city like gentle waves, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. 3 months after the concert, Madison organized the first Dignity Day at Harvard University. Students, faculty, and community members gathered not just to raise money, but to share stories. Jordan was the guest speaker, standing before hundreds of people who hung on his every word. Before that day, Jordan said, his voice steady and clear, I had forgotten my own name mattered. I had become invisible even to myself. But Mr. Rieu didn't just see me. He saw my humanity when I had lost sight of it. In the audience, a young graduate student named Sarah wiped away tears. She had been struggling with depression and had felt invisible in her own way. Jordan's words reminded her that everyone's story mattered, that everyone deserved to be seen and heard. After the event, Sarah approached Jordan. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that today." Jordan smiled, remembering André's words about passing it forward. We all need to be reminded sometimes that we matter. Meanwhile, Emily had become something of a local legend at the shelter where she volunteered. Her gentle approach with the residents came from a place of genuine understanding. She remembered how easily she could have walked past Jordan that day, lost in her own world of indifference. One evening, while serving soup, she met a woman named Grace who reminded her painfully of herself. Grace was well-dressed but clearly struggling, recently unemployed and too proud to ask for help. "I don't belong here," Grace whispered, ashamed to be in line for a free meal. Emily sat beside her, remembering her own initial discomfort. "None of us think we belong here until we realize we all do. We're all just one moment away from needing help." Grace looked up, surprised by the kindness in Emily's voice. "How do you know?" "Because I almost walked past someone who needed help. I almost chose to not see. But someone taught me that indifference is a choice, and so is compassion." They talked for hours that night. By the end of their conversation, Grace had not only accepted help, but had volunteered to help others. The cycle continued. Tyler's shop had become an unofficial community center. He had placed a small sign in his window, "Everyone welcome here." The extra storage room that Jordan had organized became a place where people could leave donations, clothes, food, even job leads written on scraps of paper. One afternoon, a businessman named David rushed into the shop, clearly agitated. He had just lost his job and was feeling overwhelmed. Tyler, remembering his own harsh words about Jordan, approached with patience instead of judgment. "Rough day?" Tyler asked simply. David looked up, surprised by the kindness. Everything's falling apart." "I know that feeling," Tyler replied, thinking of how his perspective had changed. "But falling apart isn't the same as staying down. Sometimes we need help getting back up." Tyler didn't just sell David the coffee he'd come for. He listened to his story, offered practical advice about local job resources, and reminded him that temporary setbacks didn't define his worth. David left feeling heard and hopeful, carrying Tyler's business card with several job contacts written on the back. Even Ryan had found his calling through his writing. His articles about homeless individuals had caught the attention of a major Boston newspaper, but his most powerful piece was about his own transformation, titled "The Day I Stopped Laughing." In it, he wrote, "I thought I was a good person until I heard my own cruel laughter echo in my memory. That moment taught me that goodness isn't the absence of bad thoughts. It's the choice to act with compassion despite our initial instincts." The article went viral, inspiring thousands of people to examine their own responses to those in need. Ryan received hundreds of emails from people sharing their own moments of realization and change. André, meanwhile, had begun incorporating a moment of reflection into each of his concerts. Not a sermon, but a simple reminder that music had the power to open hearts. And open hearts had the power to change the world. During one performance in New York's Central Park, he dedicated a piece to all the Jordans in every city and all the people who choose to see them. In the audience that night was a young teacher named Michael, who was struggling with his own preconceptions about his students from difficult backgrounds. After the concert, Michael approached André. "Your words tonight, they reminded me why I became a teacher, to see the potential in everyone, not just the easy students." André smiled. "One person's belief in us can change everything. You have that power every day." Michael returned to his classroom with renewed purpose, and his students noticed the difference immediately. He saw them not as problems to manage, but as individuals with stories worth understanding. The mathematical precision of kindness continued to multiply. Each act of compassion created new opportunities for more compassion. Each person who felt seen became someone who could see others. 6 months after that life-changing afternoon, Jordan received an unexpected phone call. His sister Lisa had been searching for him ever since his story appeared in the news. "Jordan?" Her voice trembled through the phone. "Is it really you?" The reunion was tearful and healing. Lisa had carried guilt for years, wondering what had happened to her brother after their family fell apart. She had searched homeless shelters and called hospitals, never knowing how to find him. "I thought I'd lost you forever," she cried as they embraced at South Station. "I thought I'd lost myself," Jordan replied, "but someone helped me remember who I was." Lisa moved to Boston to be closer to her brother, and together they started a family counseling service specifically for families dealing with separation due to addiction, mental health, or economic hardship. Their personal experience gave them credibility and compassion that textbooks couldn't teach. The shelter where Jordan volunteered eventually offered him a full-time position as a peer counselor. His office wall displayed a simple framed quote that André had written for him. "Your story isn't defined by where you've been, but by where you choose to go." And on every anniversary of that transformative day, the community would gather on Boston Common for what became known as the Jordan Day celebration. Not a celebration of homelessness, but a celebration of human dignity, second chances, and the power of seeing each other clearly. André would often attend these gatherings, not as a celebrity but as a friend. He would bring his violin and play simple melodies while people shared stories of kindness received and kindness given. The plaque installed on the spot where André and Jordan first met bore a simple inscription. "Here on this ordinary day, ordinary people chose to be extraordinary. May all who pass this way remember, everyone has a story, everyone has worth, everyone deserves to be seen." Years later, when people asked André about his most meaningful performance, he never mentioned Carnegie Hall or the Royal Albert Hall. He always spoke of that afternoon on Boston Common when he didn't perform music, but helped orchestrate something far more beautiful, the symphony of human connection, played out in real time, with real hearts, creating real change that echoed through countless lives. The true masterpiece wasn't the music André played, but the harmony he helped create between strangers who learned to see each other as neighbors, as family, as fellow travelers on the difficult but beautiful journey of being human. And on that cold winter evening in the warmth of his modest home, Jordan felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace.